I'll be a monkey's uncle, everybody. We've got our panelists joining. There seemed to be a daylight savings kind of thing. And thank you all for joining. This is the Impact for Breakfast session on building the seaweed value chain. Our two facilitators are here, Joe and Hari. Apologies for syncing time zones and everything else, but we can get started. And I just begin by introducing myself. I am Kayvon. I'm based in Colorado. I head up Impact for Breakfast. I'll give you a little background on Impact for Breakfast and this series, and then I'll hand it off to Hari and Joe. And our two practitioners in the seaweed transition, Pierre and Jeff, will join in a minute. So Impact for Breakfast started about 18 years ago, and just a handful of people around a table saying, yeah, there's something to this. There are needs that are not being addressed. There's private capital that's waiting to be deployed to generate social and environmental impacts. And we need to generate more attention on this, awareness, and show the way. Since then, there's over 6,300 members as part of Impact for Breakfast. We are organized in a decentralized way, 50 chapters, 49 of them are local, meaning in cities near you. Some are very, very active, like in Europe, in the US, and others are nascent, like Kuala Lumpur. But importantly, they are addressing a need that has been identified on the ground, and they're coming together to try and address that need. The other chapter is the global virtual chapter, and that's the session that we are leading here is with that membership, over 5,000 members. So thank you for joining. I'd like to introduce the series. This is a 4-part series on nature, oceans, plastics, but really we're using a systemic lens to look at plastics. Where are we now? What are the impacts, the trade-offs, and what do we need to do? So today's session is really focused on people who are doing it. They're helping us lead the way in the plastic transition. There are dozens and dozens of examples around the planet. We're going to showcase 2 of them. I'd like to give a summary of session 1. Session 1, Joe and Hari really just laid it all out. They talked about nature investments, investing in nature as infrastructure, as opposed to what we've been doing for about 100 or so years, which is a consumption investment process. So what needs to happen? What is the disproportionate? How is the scale weighted towards the old and the realizations that it no longer serves us? So we have Joe, maybe you could talk about very, very briefly about the different components in session 1 and how you broke it out. And yeah, you can give that background. And I encourage you to go to our YouTube channel where the recordings of that session are, and for all of our virtual sessions. That link is in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kayvon, and thank you all very much for joining. And it's wonderful to be able to bring together such great leading companies to explore the value chain that we're trying to build. So effectively, we're looking at building an entirely new value chain, not new, but sort of how to scale up the seaweed to bioplastics value chain. And the way we exposed it on the first session was very much coming in from where there's regulatory triggers that are changing the cost structures for existing value chain players, as well as other regulatory catalysts, which are impending a financial motivation for the incumbents to have to look at solutions. The problem being that of all of the various alternative solutions, none of them are easy or great. What we've identified is that seaweed is the highest potential scalable, sustainable alternative for how we can address alternatives for plastics usage. And where we're building an investment platform is how to be able to address the various problems that any one company on their own cannot necessarily recreate on an industry basis, as we'll explore today, and how to create a value chain with the enablers, the upstream, midstream, downstream, as well as alternative usage for seaweed, which is a very exciting investment and impact opportunity globally. That obviously brings a financial and systems narrative to how that scales up ocean and coastal area co-benefits and impact generally. So what's exciting is the ability to look at it at a systemic level in terms of how we match up the expectations of investors who are not looking just for returns and commercial returns, but excess returns where there's lower risks, lower correlations, as well as the impact, and actually have that systemic lens for how we look at the value chain that we're trying to address. And commensurately, looking at how the different stages of innovations need to be able to come together, and using the collaborative space that Audrey and Kayvan have put together here to look at it as a collective in terms of how can we help, and how do we use different partnerships from corporates for offtakes? How do we use that for policymakers in terms of the oceans? How do we coordinate from investors all the way to innovators and bring together the right building blocks for one value chain that we need to solve and focus on that? So very excited for this conversation, and look forward to getting into the weeds of it. Sorry, I couldn't resist a pun at the end of that.
Thanks very much, Joseph. And Kayvan, if I may, so look, this is the third of a four-part series. And as Joseph just gave a recap, the first session was really systemic investing as a theme and how plastics can be a demonstration. The second session, we went into some of the dynamics around microplastics in particular and the health and environmental implications. It was largely from a kind of a substantive and science side, but also what that can result in terms of pathways to commercialization. From the first session and the description that Joseph gave, when we talk about systemic ideas or integration or complexity, often many of us get a little bit scared away. This third session is really about how do we ground that in reality in terms of specific opportunities that exist today that we can invest in, and how they've taken an approach that's slightly different than the conventional, but is very material in terms of its contribution for impact within these value chains. Its thoughtfulness around where it sits, but also what the relationships and dependencies are within that systemic lens. But most importantly, that are tractable from an investment perspective today, and you can see the pathway to returns. Because at the end of the day, if we want systems change and we're trying to affect the whole system, parts of that system can be influenced in the near term. Other aspects need enabling conditions through regulatory policy or infrastructure or other pieces that's going to take a little bit longer. But we can't wait for everything to be reconciled before we move into the systems change dialogue and think about transition. What we need to do is really focus on what can be done now and what we need to build in order to be able to invest in the pathway in the future. So there's no time to stop. So today's session, I think, is going to be really informative around sort of how there are possibilities today that are investable, that show outsized returns, to Joseph's point, or have the pathway to show outsized returns from a private investment perspective, and then how they fit within the systemic thinking.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hari. One thing that spoke to me very loudly in session 2 is just literally microplastics and then nanoplastics. Like just that one metric they used, they said 1 part per some unit of measure is a nanoplastic. A red blood cell is 6 parts for the same unit of measure. I don't remember the unit of measure, but the blood-brain barrier is irrelevant in this case. We are, from our toes to the top of our heads, micro and nanoplastics are floating in us. We can't wait to realize what the impacts of this are, though the literature is certainly catching up. I know there's a Netflix documentary coming up on the 16th that's going to showcase it even more. It's going to scare the hell out of us. And that's what it did listening to session 2. That's why it was session 2. We wanted to build the system case first, not scare you right off the bat. But the why was answered definitely through a human lens in session 2. So let me just scan through our attendees and make sure that our 2 panelists are here, and they are not. So there's an executive decision to be made to make good use of everybody's time. I suspect that we should probably reschedule, and just I give you my sincere apologies, and we will be in touch directly to everyone who registered on this call and reschedule this for the next week or 2. My sincere apologies. Is there anything at all that Joe, Hari, or anyone joining us would like to say before we close the session?
Well, if I may, if there's anybody that has something to contribute either from the previous sessions or a reason why they're here today, or a conversation starter, we can spend a couple of minutes doing that. But Kevin, I think it's the right approach, because I think what we all really want to hear from are the 2 entrepreneurs and the solutions that fit in this systemic lens that we've been talking about. But I would just open it up first to say if there's any contributions from the group on the call right now in terms of why you're here, any reflections on the previous sessions and how this might fit in, or any reflections on your work and how it contributes to the theme of the 4-part series.
Thank you.
Is it possible to
Please,
just chime in for a minute?
please.
So the reason I signed up is I'm working with a company called Biotic. Instead of plastic, Biotic. They have about 5 years of R&D in order to create a plastic using seaweed as a source of that they will convert into the plastics. A little animal that does it functions extremely well in saline environments. Also, it's a process they've engineered so that ultimately it could be cost competitive with oil-based plastics. I mean, that's the big conundrum in the industry. So bioplastics can be made. That's not so hard anymore. What is hard is to come to a cost point where it can start to replace oil-based plastics. The planning for this company is they have 1 test facility now in Israel. We're working on building a bigger one in the Netherlands to basically test out larger volumes, right? That's the phase TRL 6. That will be in the north of the Netherlands, and then following on, hopefully a commercial factory. And this year we'll be doing a fundraise of about 15 million. That's the planning at the moment. And the company is working with a number of OEMs because what they make is pure drop-in, so it can replace character-wise hard as well as soft plastics the industry works with. The difficulty is that plastics are everywhere. So whatever you touch most likely have an element of plastic. Whatever you wear most likely will have an element of plastic. Your shoes, the room you sit in, I mean, anything. So that is a huge challenge. And in my mind personally, also collaboration needed between whatever laws are being developed and then whatever we could accelerate science-wise. And we're working with University of Wageningen. One collaboration set up already. Got a subsidy for that. That's basically to characterize the compounds as well as work on the end product and characterize that. That's important. And and then there's two more technical schools in the Netherlands we're working with. And then about 3 companies that have side streams that can be used as alternatives for seaweed.
Thanks, Arjun.
So that
Super interesting.
At some point to have the CEO share with this group or anybody interested where they're at.
Yeah.
Much appreciated. Thank you so much. If you could share the name of the company in the chat.
I'll put it in chat. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Great. Is there anyone else who would like to make a comment on where they sit, how they intersect with this issue? If they joined the other sessions, if they have any observations that they'd like to share at this point, that would be very helpful.
Yes, I just had one comment. So I'm working with Elements Financial. Our goal is we're working with coastal communities in Canada and abroad in order to help these communities kind of shift to a new form of blue economy, and especially using the system investing approach. My question here was when we're taking a holistic view of the oceans and all the resources, why only focus on plastics? Or maybe this is just one angle of the whole discussion potentially. I wasn't there on the previous discussion,
absolutely.
so this is
it's a great
why.
question. It's a great question. If I could just interject and answer that. So it's effectively plastics is not the only and certainly not the best or easiest or cheapest use of seaweed, and there are numerous very exciting alternative uses of seaweed, and I think we've got 17,000 different species of seaweed globally. So the science is only just starting. We've only got scientific research on 400 of them. So you're 100% right. But where we're coming in is from the top-down angle. So how do we actually have the financial mechanisms? And what we've identified is that although seaweed is not, plastic is not the only or main optimal use of seaweed, but from a plastics perspective, it's the highest potential alternative. Remaining on oil and gas financially will become more difficult for the incumbents. So they all know they're going to have to do something, especially as carbon border adjustment mechanisms are coming in place. Decarbonization isn't going to cut it for more than 70% of it. And of all of the other alternative sources of bioplastics, some which are very scalable, such as corn and sugarcane, at that scale would not really be sustainable, will have other problems. And many others, and I apologize for having picked on one of them last time, which was not accurate, but many other alternatives, whether seaweed or others, have some potential. Seaweed is probably one of the most scalable, which brings the financial mechanisms of the incumbent industry to seaweed, as opposed to seaweed going and knocking at the door of the different use cases and saying, here's an alternative. I mean, there's other ways of having food. There's other ways of having face creams and biofuels. So it's from that angle that we felt that we're addressing and also reframing the oceans as part of a solution rather than just a symptom, and have a viable alternative financial mechanisms then upstream rather than just downstream through circularity, which is great and should continue.
Yeah.
So I hope that addresses part of your question. But
so if I may, and this is a perfect segue as well. So a couple of things. Antoine, it's nice to see a fellow Canadian on the call. I'm sitting in Halifax, Nova Scotia. If you want to talk more about oceans and Canada, please reach out directly, and I'm happy to have a conversation. I think to Joseph's point, and in direct response, absolutely. When we think about systemic investing or systemic approaches in the ocean, we're thinking beyond just seaweed inputs into the plastic production cycle. The reason we are focusing on that in this session is really as a test case around the systemic investment narrative. In terms of other pathways for kind of oceans to the circular economy, it's a great segue into Carbon Wave, which is one of the profiled enterprises here, and Jeff just joined, so we can go into that, Kayvan, if you think it's appropriate. And then coming back, Arjan, to your points, I just want to pull out two salient things that I heard from what you said, that I think are really relevant as we listen to Jeff and as we listen to Nopla as well. One is that you said something to the effect that transition is possible. So the technologies exist. We're not 20 years ago when we were in the early stages of R&D to understand what can work. So these solutions do exist, but the cost curve is often too high. The second thing you said is that is exactly that, is the replacement cost is higher today than it is, so that incumbents won't change necessarily until or unless certain things happen on an enabling environment perspective, and that's either regulations or scale production. And I think, again, the case study that we have with Carbon Wave will talk a little bit about that in terms of the solutions existing in a variety of forms, Antoine, to your point, not just in plastic inputs, but also how the cost curve can be reduced to make this competitive as an alternative or a replacement in incumbent industries going forward. So Kayvan, up to you in terms of what you want to do here, but Jeff has just joined, and we can go into Carbon Wave if you'd like.
I can only say that the best laid plans of mice and men are laughable. So, Jeff, would you like to proceed? And or we can just reschedule the session, which is another option.
I'm happy to participate right now. Is Nopla on or not?
Not yet, not yet.
Yeah.
So your presentation is most welcome.
I would love to speak a bit and share a bit of what Carbon Wave is doing. I appreciate very much this opportunity, and for those who are here, this is wonderful. We appreciate it. Carbon Wave exists to try to actually scale something that matters. My why in all of this has been literally, I looked at Paul Hawken's drawdown, which is 100 solutions for the planet. And when you look at the back of that book, and when it was first published, there were 20 up and coming solutions. And one of those was macroalgae or seaweed. And when you look at all the seaweeds, it's very clear that if you're going to do something meaningful on climate and sustainability in terms of materials and inputs, it's obvious we have to work in the ocean because there are so many terrestrial needs that would be competing for space if you're going to do something at scale. And so when you look at the ocean and seaweeds, the only seaweed that we found that is at real scale is sargassum. And we said, why is no one working with that? Sargassum is a seaweed that started off the east coast of the United States. And due to warming oceans and over-nutrification of the waters from nitrogen and phosphorus and all these fertilizers and other pollutants that are coming into the ocean, sargassum actually escaped to the middle of the planet near the equator, found all this sun, and became an invasive species on a scale we've never seen before. I use this map behind me to show some of the density maps of where it occurs, because it's hard to picture how big a problem this is. And if you've ever been down in the Caribbean, anywhere between, say, now it's into February all the way through November, you sometimes see this, and it piles up in massive quantities. It is really the ocean trying to heal itself. The ocean is trying to deacidify. It creates, sargassum pulls in some of the pollutants, but does it in a productive way and creates biodiversity hotspots around the ocean where they didn't exist before, where it can be kind of a dead zone. So in a way, it's the ocean trying to heal itself. It's very good for the planet. It is a detoxification. It is a deacidification for the planet. But when you look at what happens when it hits the shores, when it actually drifts from the east to the west, it'll hit the shores of island nations and also Mexico and Belize as the backstop in the Caribbean here. And so what that does then is create a terrible environmental disaster. It creates methane because it packs into the bays and it starts rotting right in place. It takes the oxygen or it takes the carbon dioxide out, but it can actually just really create a mat that is really killing the fish. It creates levels of ammonia that kill the coral reefs. and you're leaking arsenic into the water supply. You're hurting the tourism, of course. And to us, this was just another um, injustice heaped upon the global south in a way that in an area that really depends on tourism. And we've seen enough with hurricanes. So we set about trying to figure out how do you turn what is a real problem and a threat uh, into an opportunity. And we said, well, why are people, we understand and appreciate and love that people are growing seaweed around the world to try to address this problem and to do good things for the ocean. But here the ocean's already doing that. And so we said, well, what are the challenges? And there's real reasons why no one's done this before at any scale. And that is it's difficult seaweed to deal with. It's intermittent to some degree, although that's becoming less and less an issue as the season extends. And it's hard, it's not as rich a seaweed as kelp or other seaweeds that are naturally just sort of you can create something out of them easily. So we said three things. This is what we did. We joined with a company in Mexico that's collecting from the resorts. And we said, let's join forces and create something that can be collecting this at scale, protecting tourism from the beaches, putting out booms to protect it from hitting the beach, collecting it on the side of the booms or on the beach, and trying to restore these wonderful beaches to help the tourism and get the sargassum out of the water before it starts rotting and creating all these problems, including methane. So then we made several products out of it. The liquid fraction we make into a biostimulant for crops. It's highly effective because we have so much of this. We're able to concentrate it up. We'll touch 30,000 tons a year plus, and we're expanding. But we can concentrate the liquid fraction up to such a degree that the mannitols and laminares and things that really work well in biostimulants for crops that help increase crop yields, we are very concentrated. And so we're able to make this through an IP process of series of filtration devices and steps that we can actually go and say, let's make Sarga Power in a very concentrated form, such that a large US distributor tested us against 60 other of their biostimulants that they chose. And because we were so concentrated with good things, we worked at half the application rate and we beat the other 60 biostimulants. What this means is we can create for the region an economic engine that closes the loop of all of this, of the pollutants in the water, the warming oceans, put it back on food to help us fight both climate change in terms of drought and heat resistance, which it does convey, and also just crop yields and food security. The pulp, and I'll wrap up so we can get into some discussion, but the pulp part of the sargassum we've made into a emulsifier for cosmetics, which could be a product in the future. We've made a leather prototype. We're looking at other energy applications, but also the plastics piece. So bioplastics, and this is obviously one of the focus points of this whole thing. We have made bio-naphtha, which is the precursor to biofuels and bioplastics. So bio-naphtha, as most of you probably know, it's really just oil, essentially, instead of 65 million year old oil in the ground from plants and animals that died all those years ago, to plants from this year that are pulling carbon out of the air and out of the ocean. We're using that to create our inputs and we can make the bio-naphtha. We're going to have as a guest one of the top 5 cosmetics companies in the world on this call, but they were not able to do it due to some confidentiality reasons. But we tested with them our bio-naphtha as a bioplastic for their plastics in their product lines. And they found it worked just as well, absolutely applicable. More expensive than recycled plastic, yes, but something that can scale because of the size of this bloom, something that can actually be done with all the pulp that is left over after we make our biostimulant and sell that around the world, which we're doing. And it's something that we were able to say, all right, this is an opportunity for us to try to address a meaningful problem. It does not solve the microplastics problem, but it does solve if we're going to make the plastics, let's use it with product that we make today in the ocean that pulls carbon down, is a sustainability solution, contributes to the circular economy here, and is a step towards the future where we can actually start making, if we have time to do the research, we could get to a point where perhaps there's a way to make it where it does solve the microplastics problem. But this is a non-fossil fuel based opportunity to really stop using fossil fuels for this case and use something that helps the world this year, today, and draws down carbon. And so that's really what we're excited to talk about and listen to what you all are thinking about the problem. I know you've had 2 series before this. Would love to engage in discussion about what's possible here. And certainly Napa, when they arrive, is a wonderful solution based on their seaweed as well. But I'm grateful for the time and turn it back over to you, Joseph.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Just one question on the plastic, and it's amazing, but like any other company, you're going to be resource constrained. You're building a business. You've got to be diversified, and the cost curve is pretty high, given where we are in the maturity of the space. But what is it going to take? What do you need to put more into plastics? What would be helpful for you, whether it's from external parties or from technology and enablement? What will it take? How can we help?
Thank you. I mean, we would like to partner in a couple of ways with groups that want to help address this solution. Number one, I do feel like we have this large cosmetics company application already on the plastic side, and we do have 2 years of having figured out how to do this through a series of pyrolysis and HTL, which is hydrothermal liquefaction. We know we can make the product. We have some of the buyers, but it is a more expensive form of plastic, as I mentioned. So really I think the most transformative way that, at least in the sargassum case, we can move forward is this. We've already been invested in by the World Bank, International Finance Corporation, and we have access to low-cost capital to help us expand over time. And in fact, we're doing that, as I mentioned. What we need, Joseph, to address your question, is we need a plan, really, that can get us up to that scale of being more geographically expanded across the Caribbean so that we can address this problem at scale. Because what we do know is when we're going to make this plastic, it has to be about 100,000 tons or more to make a plant economical. And to give you a sense of that, about 300,000 to 500,000 is in this Mexico region right here in Quintana Roo. So you need to get some reasonable volume in terms of what comes ashore. In Mexico, about 500,000 tons come ashore. We already are about 10%, 20% of the collection market in Mexico. We could get to that scale. So what we're looking for is, if we had the freedom, as you mentioned, resource constraints. Right now, we're focused on the biostimulant because we know we can sell that and that's value. Making plastics, it's difficult. In our world, we believe that you have to not just use the pulp part and make plastics, but turn the liquid fraction into something valuable so that the entire production process can make sense financially. And so we have a way to subsidize plastic development, bioplastic development with the biostimulant, and that we get paid to collect it by the hotels. So the entire picture can start to make sense. In our world, that's how you step through. That's our theory of change, how you step through the difficult economic process of scaling this by having collection costs, maybe. That's a little part of it, right, that we get paid to collect. The biggest part is the biostimulant that we can create and make money from. And then with a partner that can bring in perhaps other buyers of the bioplastics, we can have the buyers lined up with this large cosmetics company. We can help find one or two. We need help finding one or two more big buyers. Then we can create the plant, make the whole system work with our access to low-cost debt from the World Bank, and develop the plastics plant, which would cost at scale about $50 million, which we can project finance if we have the buyers. In order to take that risk and go that next step further, really what we need is about $10 to $20 million so that over time, over the next 3 to 5 years, we can bring in the right players, get the plant designed, get the permits done in Mexico where most of this ends up. We're in the right position already. 74% of it ends up in the Mexico region. We can take this sargassum and do the work to take what we've already proven and scale it up with the right partners.
Awesome.
That would be our dream. That's one of the reasons why we started this company.
So if I just go down to one aspect, which is sort of the business aspect and the economics that's needed to bring down the unit costs, and effectively one of the logistical issues is it's everywhere, the transport, how to get the processing done at source, and the cost involved with doing that. And that's a bit of a leading question. And that's very much at the core of the thesis that we're trying to build in terms of putting together the value chain. And I wanted to bring in another founder who's in the audience, which I wanted to maybe chime in, Rana, if from FICO, who I think might have, and it's a great opportunity, thanks to Impact Factors, to bring in this opportunity to do this and see if your solution can help here, because I think from just introducing Rana, which is and FICO very much focused on a different use case of plastics, because from when we look at it from top down, we always start with what is the use cases and the performances, and the performance of different types of plastics have different regulatory environments. And yes, if it's food, and there's a lot of complexity and headwinds we're finding. If you're going to go up against the recycling industry, that's maybe not the best place to start. Whereas in agriculture, where you've got about $100 billion market already and not much recycling, you probably need less performance requirements to address those type of plastics, which leads to innovations like the one that Run has come up with, which I'll give her the floor to chime in on, and see how that actually can change the dynamics of the unit costs to address that very point of what you need. Run, it'd be great if you could give us a brief overview of what you do and how this can help.
Before we transition to Rana, I just wanted to pull out a couple of things from this part of the conversation, just for the whole group to stimulate some discussion going forward as well. So one is that if we reflect back to the first two sessions, we talked about systems. We were talking about systems across the value chain in something very big, either if it's the sustainability transition writ large, if it's nature as infrastructure as a whole, or if it's the plastics transition, which is a massive industrial change that we need. What I want to point out here is that, Jeff's explanation of his why and this company demonstrates a systems approach within an entity. So if you look, I've known Jeff for about 5 years, and the first thing that attracted me to this business and the solution is A, the mission and the why from the founders, but B, that every step of the process, from collection to input to R&D to outputs and inputs into other industries, creates value in this business, and it creates impact. So sargassum is a problem, and typically when we think about just the solution end of the equation and the product you're trying to create, you try to craft something for a buyer. What this company has done, though, is looked at a problem and said, okay, there's a big problem. Can we create a revenue stream out of dealing with the problem at source, and then figure out other pathways to monetize by replacing negative inputs in other industries? So there's impact at every stage, but there's also value creation at every stage. So that's one part of a systemic way of thinking, is across the operations of your business, are there ways to accelerate and stack this value? The second thing I want to point out is that, the input into the plastics industry is one of many possible revenue streams on the production side of Carbon Wave into the inputs of other industries. Part of the economics here and the unit economics is about how do you get the unit cost of the specific pathway you're trying to achieve to replace incumbents, and that would be in the plastic value chain. But something that Jeff just mentioned here, which I think is really important for us to consider, is that if you can stack value across your core business, like Carbon Wave is doing, then you can create a financial proposition in a collective sense across these different revenue lines that makes the overall group entity or the business as a whole profitable because of the margins in each of the value chains. So if you look at the outputs of the process that Carbon Wave creates, there's the biostimulant, there's the possibility of the emulsifier in the cosmetics industry, there's the leather replacement, and there's the plastic the oil replacement into plastics production. Now, individually, each of those has its own unit economics and considerations, but collectively, if you can create marginal value in each of those lines, then you can start to accelerate sort of the stacked financial and investable proposition, which is what Carbon Wave has been doing and is continuing to doing with further investment on R&D and manufacturing capability. So Rana, I'd love to turn to you, but I'd like to just park a question that I want everyone to think about, and Jeff, you to answer specifically after Rana speaks, which is, in the priority value chain that you're focused on right now, which is the biostimulant, you've gone through a journey that's very similar around sort of replacing incumbents. So first, demonstrating that it's a positive solution. Second, understanding the cost dynamics and how to build out the corporate case for replacing incumbent, fertilizers or other biostimulants. And I'd like it'd be great if you could walk through that journey a little bit, from kind of the initial formation of the biostimulant and Sarga Power into what happened very recently in terms of this relationship with a very large distributor of agricultural inputs, which is getting you through that kind of innovation to cost curve to profitability, and we're still on that journey. But that story is indicative of what's necessary for each part of the solution set that you have, and then for the plastics transition specifically. But first, Rana, I'd love to hear sort of from you, and then Jeff will turn back to a little bit about this evolution of research into replacing incumbents through a cost curve, through the unit cost kind of dynamics that makes these propositions investable and systems change possible. Rana?
Hi, gentlemen. Thanks, Joseph, for inviting me into the conversation quickly. It's nice to meet all of you. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of FICO Technologies, Inc. What we do is we basically take seaweed biomass, we put it through a biorefinery process, and then extract valuable components. That allows us to create bioplastics that are designed for the agricultural sector, that are completely earth digestible and non-toxic. The goal is really to save farmers money. So that's kind of the realm in which we work. As Joseph alluded to, it's a fairly large market. It's a massive problem, specifically because of the concern that you gentlemen touched on earlier about microplastics and nanoplastics from the previous session and how that's getting into our bodies. And largely that is through our food systems and the food we consume, because they are contaminated heavily with micro and nanoplastics. So that's what we do in a nutshell. If there's anything you'd like me to expand on further, I'm happy to, but I just wanted to provide context first.
Absolutely. And the reason I wanted to get your input here is how you address the problem we're having on the unit cost economics. So how does your solution and the approach you've taken and the fact that the requirements for agricultural use plastics are not as stringent as others mean that there's a completely different business model that you can enable at a much lower cost that can be closer to the actual production aspect of things? Could you maybe speak to that, and how does the science meet the business?
Yeah, it's always a question of unit economics, isn't it? Yeah, there's a number of ways that we've addressed this, I think. One is through the technology itself, the process in which that we utilize. As I said, it's biorefinery process at a high level. It's using green chemistry and enzymes. It allows us to be very cost effective and take the biomass and process it and the process itself can handle, it's low energy, so it doesn't require very powerful inputs as well. So that's one way. The other is that we're working directly in partnership with coastal communities, similar to how Jeff kind of described the issue in Mexico. In Canada, it's slightly different, though we also do have sargassum. It's a different species. It's not as big a problem. But by working with coastal communities directly, that helps us lower our costs, our CapEx costs, because a lot of the infrastructure is already in place from these fishing communities. And then on top of that, these communities have a lot of waste that's produced, either single source agricultural waste or fisheries waste, that we actually incorporate into our product to keep the costs down. So we're trying to really not create an entire new industry, but repurpose a lot of the work that that these communities already do. And that's how we've really managed to keep our unit economics down. On top of that, of course, the product itself is supposed to save farmers money. So that's another way, despite being priced a little bit higher because we're early stage, that does in the long run benefit farmers, and that's where the value is really created. I hope that answers the question.
It does, and I'm glad that Pierre has joined us. That's sort of the third piece of that same leg. But effectively going back to what Jeff's point was in terms of the amount of money needed to do the conversion and the transport needs, apart from just your unit economics for your product, but the unit economics that you then enable if Jeff is trying to get his product to Pierre, how can you fit that missing middle? Because effectively we can't get the cost structure low enough at Jeff's level to that amount of volume for Pierre to have that in London and plug it in. So focusing on your green extraction technology, what makes it unique that you can bring it to such a low cost that it can actually be done scalably at source?
Yeah, I think it's largely the tech itself. As I mentioned, it's proprietary, so I can't go into too much detail, of course. But yeah, I think it's the proximity principle, being close to the biomass itself, that helps reduce costs significantly. And I think the ability to not only generate bioplastics but multiple products as well, that helps increase our outputs, and therefore our costs go down. Because if you're using, I think seaweed is an extremely valuable biomass. It has so many valuable components in it. And by extracting as many as we can, that's where I think we can generate, we're using the same process essentially and minorly tweaking it depending on inputs, different species, then the unit economics do go down. And again, it's kind of emphasizing those relationships with coastal communities and partnerships. Those are really fundamental and key. And I think similar to what Jeff says, it's those values of working with community that are really, really important. And by doing so, we effectively have access to incredible labor force that's right there where the localized issue is. They have infrastructure already in place, which reduces, I think, risk overall in terms of investment. And then again, localized expertise as well that helps improve efficiencies on processes as a whole, especially when you're working with Indigenous communities. There's a lot of traditional knowledge that is held in these communities, and I think that's a huge asset to have, to be able to work in direct partnership with them. So those are kind of the ways that I think are ways to help reduce unit costs. And I would say in general, we need investment in this sector as a whole. And we also need regulations as well, for the timing of those regulations to come forward and take effect, so that when we are developing bioplastics, they can get to the market and compete at a reasonable cost compared to conventional petroleum-based ones.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks so much for joining. I guess we'll let you introduce Notpla and the great progress you guys are making.
Thank you very much, and thanks for organizing this conversation. And sorry for joining kind of like a bit late, but really excited to share a little bit what we've been kind of like up to at Notpla, and how hopefully that's like the direction of travel for many more in this space. So a little recap on the company. We are developing alternatives to single-use plastics using seaweed. We've been doing so for over a decade. To date, we've replaced 40 million single-use plastics. We are active in 11 countries. We are kind of like predominantly focused on food service applications, where, for example, for takeaway food containers, any paperboard, folded board kind of like product has a thin layer of plastic on the inside to resist the grease and moisture. If you think of your coffee cup or your kind of like salad bowl, it's not just cardboard, there's a thin layer of plastic in there. And so we can replace that with seaweed for giving it the barrier properties needed for doing the job. And that's one of our kind of like growing portfolio of solutions that has had the most traction so far. We have been backed by kind of like a range of like impact VC funds and family offices. We've raised 35 million pounds to date. The team is a mix of chemists, engineers, designers, biz dev, and we do all of the R&D. And then our approach is very much fabless. So we toll manufacture with partners. We don't kind of like invest in the like manufacturing capabilities if we don't have to. And that's allowed us to very quickly kind of like bring products to market with like uncapped kind of like capacity to meet the large demands of like QSR groups or partners like this. It's been a bit of a lonely journey. There hasn't been a lot of kind of like players to date that have kind of like brought products to market in this packaging space. There's a lot of kind of like reasons why, but we've been very excited to prove that it's not just tech that works in the lab, but it actually kind of like meets the needs of brand owners who kind of like decide to switch from plastic to not pla across the board. And also we've accepted that we don't have the capabilities and the properties to replace every type of plastic under the sun, and kind of like have really focused on where there is the best kind of like match of the properties, as well as the kind of like the beautiful biodegradable kind of like properties that nature has gifted seaweed for the last kind of like hundreds of millions of years to be compatible with the next like form of life. And so that's given us a bit of a focus on really like targeting this application first. We have been very successful in the world of kind of like food service on the go. So we big partnerships with contract caterers like Compass Group that like provides kind of like food to millions of people every day in like from corporate canteens to stadium festivals, like concert halls, so many different places where the use of disposable is convenient and is probably going to stay for a little longer. And so we've seen this really meeting their requirements in terms of kind of like not challenging their operations, fitting in with the way they operate today, being able to kind of like deliver them like the full service. So really kind of like matching like we're not just like a tech company that has like one technical solution, but it's a full offering that I think is removing some of the friction for them to kind of like do extra things or go out of their way to kind of like onboard something new. And so it's been really exciting to see like major brands from like IKEA to like Universal Studios. If you go to like the Harry Potter kind of like studios, they've been using Notpla for the last couple of years, working with like delivery companies like Uber Eats and Just Eat to kind of like bring this to their restaurant chains, major kind of like sporting events from the quintessential strawberries and cream at Wimbledon to kind of like the Six Nations rugby games. Now we have, I think, a third of the Premier League football stadiums have been using Notpla for the last couple of years. So really nice kind of like high visibility adoption, which hopefully is sending a message that actually when you deliver something that is really transparent about what it is and like really making kind of like those values part of the transaction, brand owners are kind of like jumping in. Not gonna lie, there's still a lot of kind of like friction and a lot of kind of like things that we need to get right. But overall, we've seen kind of like all the right signals coming our way, and I think that like the next wave of signals is really around like human health, because for a little bit too long, plastic has been a turtle and kind of like ocean waste problem, which is undeniably like a very big problem we have, but it hasn't really hit home for the last kind of like 3-4 years with many people across the political spectrum, when actually like microplastic and health is a much more mobilizing kind of like call for action. And so with literally on Monday, the release of the microplastic documentary on Netflix, and I think a lot more kind of like scrutiny on how we wrap our food, our drinks, the thing that like enter our bodies. There's going to be a growing awareness of this, and I think offering natural solutions is going to be like a great way to address this challenge by showing that actually nature has a lot of those solutions. So we see this as probably being kind of like the next wave of fuel of kind of like building the future offering, whether it's materials or technologies or kind of like brands or full proposition. And we are hopefully ideally placed to kind of like catch that wave. And we really want the rest of the ecosystem to kind of like benefit from this as well. Like it's great to have kind of like investment going into applications, but we need from kind of like the earliest stage of kind of like the seaweed value chain to kind of like the final kind of like in the hands of consumer applications. We need the whole ecosystem to grow together, because a lot of the existing infrastructure was not built for those new applications and is kind of like outdated. And so there's lots of like really exciting opportunities to unlock still. But yeah, it starts with creating offtake in the market. And that's a bit our hope and objective.
Thanks so much, Pierre. And I like how you ended that talking about it needs to be at every step of the value chain, and that relates very nicely to the overall theme of this four-part series, which is systemic thinking, right? So across the value chain system, as well as across the plastics system, as well as across the natural capital system. So I'm going to ask a quick question, and then I want to
I guess Harry froze, or
Did we
Yep.
lose him? Yeah.
I can see other people move as well. Well,
Yeah.
thanks, Pierre. I'll let Harry jump back in as soon as he regains that. But yeah, that I'll take it into a different direction very quickly. But it's great progress and amazing to have not just a proof of concept in one, but so many different areas. Could I maybe flip it to the other side of the value chain and see where in this ecosystem, what help do you need? Not just in terms of offtake agreements from the demand side, but how do we get the unit cost economics low enough for you to really be able to scale? What do you need?
I think there are kind of like unlockers across like every single step. And I'll start by saying, sure, we need to bring the cost down, but like we're already growing 2x year on year with pure voluntary kind of like adoption. So we're still small in the grand scheme of plastics, but I think that like I wouldn't kind of like wait for us to be at parity with like plastic to do a good job at growing. And I think that's the first thing. Like, let's not leave money on the table. If people are kind of like getting more value out of what we sell to them, let's not kind of like leave that value kind of like untransacted. That being said, I think there's lots of things that can be done. So I think from kind of like the diversification of kind of like the supply, we aspire to kind of like operate across the world, and we'll want to have local kind of like partners that can provide us kind of like with local resources. If there's one thing we are learning kind of like these days is that the the truth that was kind of like established for the last 30 years, that material goods can be available, traded, and delivered in time anywhere in the world at any point, is obviously kind of like very much contested right now. So I think we're very much kind of like looking at how we're going to be able to have local supply that is much more kind of like in line with the supply chain kind of like constraints that we will continue to see. I think we want to see more investment in like technology to kind of like do things better, optimize for packaging. A lot of the seaweed world is optimized for many other applications than packaging. So a lot of our work is actually kind of like making sure we have packaging grade rather than toothpaste grade or kind of like pet food grade. I think then like a lot of it goes to kind of like systemic supporting factors. Today, like tariffs on natural materials and like seaweed by extension are generally like 5 to 10 times what the tariffs are on plastic, because for 30 years the plastics industry has done a good job at kind of like negotiating at like the different instances internationally that like we should be trading these things without any friction, whereas I think seaweed falls a bit in the food like basket where countries have wanted to have some sort of sovereignty over these things, and therefore putting more barriers. There's no kind of like subsidies going towards kind of like those solutions today. So excitingly, in the UK, we're starting to have a little bit of kind of like recognition that those are better than plastic. Therefore, the market should be kind of like rewarded for doing the switch. European Union is starting to kind of like put some sort of like incentives in place. So those will probably like bridge some of the kind of like premium that might residually kind of like be there for a while. So again, like I think we'll take every kind of like jumps we can, but like I don't put like all my hopes and kind of like needs on just the extraction or just the kind of like the seaweed source. Those will be contributing factor to an overall kind of like improving picture.
Thanks so much. Sorry, Jeff. I think you were about to chime in on that.
Oh no, I would like to build if it's the right opportunity, Joseph,
Yes.
but I didn't want to. Okay. I think it's what's wonderful is Pierre's points about the ecosystem, I think are so important and the unit costs. And so one of the things that, you know, the unit costs are really going to come down with scale, which is again, as I mentioned, why we are working in this space. What's wonderful about this ecosystem is we've already been in touch with Pierre and his colleagues at NotPlaw. We've already been in touch with Lollyware, which is using a different seaweed to make replacements for plastic, right? We're trying to innovate as an ecosystem, which I think is beautiful and is needed. And groups like yours and Hari and others have been super helpful to try to make those connections and ecosystems work. Uh, and Kevin. So that is important. And in fact, a microcosm example of that is in Mexico, where most of this ends up. We collect it, we process it, we dry the pulp after we make our biostimulant, and we're making that pulp available to a range of industries, including biochar, for example. There were even some students who made crayons and pencils out of it. We're trying to create a platform by which multiple innovation streams can flourish, including anaerobic digestion and other things, and the pyrolysis that I mentioned for our bio-naphtha for bioplastics. Though that platform is key, and that has to come from a large source. And I think we're hopeful, at least I'll speak for myself, that I'm hopeful that someday we can make these connections with NotPlaw and Lollyware and make an ecosystem that uses whichever seaweed is the right kind, if it works. But for us, we have zeroed in on sargassum just because of the scale. The unit cost piece that Hari asked me to address as well, we felt like would be solved with scale. And we're starting to see that play out. Hari, you mentioned the biostimulant. How did we get to a low price point? If we're thinking about this overall comprehensive offering, we got lucky. We have so much of it that we could concentrate it up. We had to get the arsenic out. But as you concentrate it up, you have more and more arsenic concentration. So we had to figure out a technology that would remove the arsenic to below EU levels, concentrate up all the good things in it, the mannitols, laminarins, a bunch of amino acids, et cetera, that we know work. And the only way, Hari, we could break into that biostimulant market, which is challenging, the only way we could have done that was to find a much lower cost application at half the application rate of others. So when that large distributor tested us across 6 of the largest crops in the world, they found that we outcompeted the 60 biostimulants that they had chosen, and they found that we did it at half the application rate. So our thesis was take a large scale problem, turn it into an opportunity, use the scale to make our solution better than anything the market has seen in terms of efficacy per dollar deployed on a farmer's field. And that's what matters is what's the yield they're getting, what's the price they're paying, and make that not 3 to 5x, but make it 8 to 16x. And we were able to do that because of sargassum here in this large scale. What that means for adoption is we're taking it a step further. The last step in this process is how do you make it so easy for the farmer to adopt this at scale? Because this is 38 million tons a year and growing every year. How do you help farmers adopt this in a mass way now? So what we did is we partnered with some big tomato processors in California where we got a 16x ROI for them. We earned them per acre about $1,000 more tomato for a product that costs $60. So we said, look, we did this 2 years in a row, and we said, if we're so confident in these results, don't make farmers test them, try it, go to these hassles, spend any money buying it and testing it. Just give it to them. So we're adopting a large scale program. We've already signed up 1.5% of all the tomato processors, tomato growers in California. And we've said to them, and they want to join us because they said, look, we like your program. What's the program? We're going to just give the farmers the product. We're going to even pay you $2,000 just to deal with the paperwork and the controlled plot treatment. And at the end of the harvest, only pay us when you've gotten significantly more value than the product cost. If you don't pay us. But we should be sure the bell curve of a distribution with $1,000 per acre up at the top, whatever distribution it is, that's a low probability that the farmer won't get that. Grower's Edge is ensuring against that. They're a finance corp In ag, they've said there's a 2 to 3% chance a farmer won't get good results. We'll insure against that loss. But our fund, which we're pulling together now, will allow farmers to have this product unleash the yield potential at no risk to them. And it's based on data and the concentrated nature of what we're doing. So we're excited about that. But that's a unit cost conversation, Hari, that you were bringing about, where if we can take large corporates like AB InBev, which found 11% increase on rice yields at a 15x ROI. That kind of large adoption needs to be done in conjunction with this large seaweed mass. It is the planet, I think, reaching out to try to say, hey, deal with us. Don't let it rot, and create an ecosystem that is super low cost because of that cost advantage. And I'm excited about this ecosystem conversation because I think we can unlock a lot of solutions if we think about it at a systems level. So I just wanted to thank you for that. And Pierre, great points.
Yeah, no, this is fantastic. And another drawback to the systems conversation, which is that part of the reason I love the story of the biostimulant, Jeff, is that everybody in the ag value chain is benefiting here as well, right? Your input is driving farmer productivity and increased margins to up to 16 times, which is amazing. So they're benefiting, and then everybody through the value chain is benefiting as well. So you don't have to just target the end buyer and think about that in terms of a supply and demand kind of function. But if you get every step of the value chain kind of increasing value or marginal value, then your resistance or your friction decreases. I also do want to point out the key point that you made, which is it doesn't have to just be cost competitive. Right. Replacing incumbents is difficult, right? You have to be much better, much cheaper, and easy to get in. Otherwise, people will just go business as usual. So I think that's an important point to note. But congratulations, kind of on the progress. And I think that the moral of the story is that back to the initial thing that Arjun said as well. Some of these solutions exist. We now just need to figure out how to ease the friction to get them embedded to replace these incumbents for the system change that we need. And thinking about it every step of the pathway in the overall ecosystem, in the value chain that you're looking at, but then also for the customer value chain that your business is focusing on, are different ways to apply that systems lens, which is fantastic. Kevin, I'm going to turn back to you to see if there's we're going to open it up to the broader group. We were delayed getting started. I think there's a few minutes left if we want to have some questions for the entrepreneurs here, but it's up to you. You're in control of the agenda.
No, I think that's a perfect approach. Let's turn it to the audience. Thank you. You can just chime in or raise your hand. Anything works. Thank you. So we had a number of questions in the chat, and I don't want to pick on anyone. Kristen, it seems like you have something you'd like to
I can
contribute.
go ahead. I had put in the chat that if we're talking about larger scale global systems change, right? It's really going to require a collaborative coalition of companies like you guys that are all brilliant, and I love it, and everything you have to say. Thank you. But is that something that is somehow coming together? Are you having any conversations about some sort of collective action stance with yourselves, with your buyers, your suppliers, because overcoming the plastic incumbents is, as we noted, going to be really hard, and probably to succeed, you will require some sort of regulatory change, and that could really change the cost construct too. Right now, all these terrible externalities go free. So is this something, in terms of considerations of this kind of collaborative platform of how to really try to move the needle together?
Happy to bring some elements there. So absolutely, and I think that there are multiple different groups that need to be engaged in different ways. I think there's kind of the value chain, and as we were saying, there are kind of some streams of R&D validation and testing between kind of lots of different players, which is great because if we can create the products of tomorrow with combination of these things, it's going to be better. I think when it comes to kind of the specific example of plastics and legislation change, well, first of all, we have to be kind of realistic that there's a lot of kind of like pushback from the petrochemical industry for any kind of like reason to change. But we have for us that like it's better for people, better for planet, it's a good story. So like we don't have to spend hundreds of millions in like lobby to still get our voice heard, and so there's some exciting opportunities. Um, as I mentioned, like at NotPla, we've been kind of like pioneering the use of such kind of like products to hit the market. And so about 2 years ago, when we started to have like the first few millions of products in the hands of consumers, we felt that like it was time to kind of like tap on the shoulder of like the UK kind of like policymakers, European policymakers, say, hey, we exist, there is an alternative. Isn't it the whole kind of like spiel that you're waiting for alternatives to be available to kind of like do something about the incumbent and so on? And essentially, like those conversations all went like, we're not here to make an exception for NotPla. Good job on getting some voluntary adoption, but like we can't kind of like make something that's just going to make your business successful at the expense of the guys who are funding everything else in society, supposedly. And so after a few kind of like of this pattern, we reached out to a number of our like I saw that like we needed to show up as a industry as an emerging industry. So I reached out to a few of my kind of like competitors, most of them more kind of like at lab scale, but I hope that they will kind of like soon be more kind of like industrial scale. And we created the natural polymers group. And so as a result, like the metal industry and the plastic industry and the glass industry and the cardboard industry all have their kind of like trade bodies. And now we have the natural polymers group that can actually have a conversation and a roundtable with kind of like those partners. So we're still a small kind of like a small group. We have 7 members. It's early days. All of us are kind of like still startups or scale ups. So it's not like we are making vast amounts of money and can like do all sorts of stuff. But luckily, we found some kind of like family office and kind of like philanthropy kind of like funds to support us by paying for an independent secretariat to be able to do the non-competitive side of doing these kind of like trade things. And now that we are kind of like showing up as the Natural Polymers Group, we are getting access to like the members of parliament and like the EU Commission and all sorts of places where we're able to say, hey, let's talk about these kind of like strategies in those policies. It's not just reuse, it's not just recycle, because by the way, those are two strategies that profit the plastics industry. But what about not plastic at all, the natural polymers? So that's one example that we've kind of like been able to pioneer to try to create a little bit of that kind of like togetherness that hopefully has more kind of like impact. Still early days, we might be fooling ourselves, but at least it feels like there is like an initial traction with that.
I can build on that question, Kristen, if it's helpful. Um, we I think that's a great point. Where are the buying groups? How do you assure that all of this has uptake as an industry? And when I think about um, some of the other ways, and what Pierre mentioned is a wonderful strategy, those groups are developing in the seaweed space in general and are needed. I think in our own experience, the World Bank IFC has been great at convening groups and bringing together large-scale government farming communities, large-scale government farming programs, bringing us to national farming programs based on the results. That's been a great conglomeration of buying and on the demand side. A second example is the beer companies. So we won an accelerator with AB InBev, which produces some of the most famous beer brands on the planet, Corona and Modelo and things like that. And because of the rice results we got of 11% lift, they're all sort of talking to each other and saying, okay, these results are happening, and they're sharing, which is beautiful in a sense, right? These competitors are still sharing sustainability solutions that they're finding. In California, at the tomato level that I mentioned, we're actually seeing the processors of tomatoes, the ones who take the trucks in from the farmers, grade them, and process them into product. They're actually pulling together their farmers, their largest farmers. That's how we signed up the 1.5% already in just one meeting with 2 farmers. They both said yes, and that was 1.5% of the California tomato market. So we're seeing in the value chain key aggregators like a processor saying, look, here's something we can do, and bringing in trusted farmers. We have seen the Mexican, as a fourth example, the Mexican government has been helpful, right? They're putting together this Sargassum Center, which is, we're sort of the pillar to that, the sort of the foundation, because we collect it, we process it, we provide the pulp, as I mentioned, after we make our biostimulant. The dried pulp is provided. And that's been a great aggregator for us, and to integrate the companies in the ecosystem that can benefit from that product. And again, the larger scale, the more types of products can afford to put it in. Whether it's going into cement, it's going into to lock away the carbon, it's going into some anaerobic digestion and biochar solutions. And lastly, the EU Gateway is a group that is doing a lot of conference work. You probably have heard about them in the space. They're putting together these Sargassum conferences. There have been 2 or 3 of them. It's beginning. It's a slow process. There's apparently lots of money coming behind it, but there is concern for how the EU can help the Caribbean deal with this and make it into a profitable venture. That really is the first time we've had an ocean-based renewable carbon supply chain at real scale for many types of materials, including plastics. And I think all those and groups like this, which is a wonderful opportunity for companies to come back together again and think about collaboration opportunities. So thank you.
Brilliant. We maybe have time for one more question if anyone would like to ask directly.
Joe,
Yeah,
Yes, please, Joe.
yeah, sure. I got this question. Particularly interested in Pierre's response here. So, the cost is so critical, right? And I feel like so often then the focus is on your own sourcing and your own processing, right? Getting those costs down. But I think especially in your case where you piggyback on this already scaled industry in the terms of coatings on paper, there are other routes available to that. I think in particular of, say, radically decreased usage rates, right? So 1 kilogram just goes further. Are there viable pathways to, get this plastic replacement performance, but using radically less of the seaweed plastic inputs?
I think it's super application specific, and it looks at what you're kind of like doing. Is it grease resistance? Is it water resistance? Like transfer rates? Like there's many places where you need more to kind of like do a job for a specific application, and there's a few where you need less. But like fundamentally, like again, like we're not very far in terms of like price from what is palatable in the market. There is still some way to go, but like as a reminder, like in a takeaway food container, like the coating in there is less than 5% of the mass of this item. So even if that was kind of like 30 or 50% more expensive than the resin that might be used in there in the first place, you're still within the palatable range for kind of like that company. This final product is much more than just the raw seaweed cost. So there's many other kind of like things to take into account. And that's where you're starting to talk about like economies of scale. And do you produce this on the machine in Finland that makes those at the rate of kind of like 300 million burger boxes a day? Because if you do, there is zero premium. But if you do anything like lower scale than this, there is some sort of kind of like inefficiencies compared to the incumbent. So it becomes about a lot more than just the price of the seaweed. And so that's why I say like every kind of like savings we'll take on the seaweed and extraction steps will help us, but that's not where we need to kind of like necessarily kind of like wait for to progress in adoption. And I think that when we are seeing the growth rate that we have, like I think there's plenty to do in just kind of like educating the market and getting adoption with what we have right now. Then like we need to do both, but we can't kind of like hide behind it has to be cheap to have adoption at scale.
I would just chime in if we have a second that also is. Oh, sorry. It looks like Sander has a question too, so I'll defer.
So thank you for your clear presentation, everybody. I would love to receive further information on the Dutch companies working on the plastics and what we could do for you within Europe, Pierre and Jeff. Thank you for your clear presentation. I would love to better understand how you work with breweries like InBev that we can connect you to as well, and Heineken and other. How does it work in the supply chain? And I'm happy to connect or take this offline with you.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Appreciate that. I think that is the key. I mean, we're at we have an opportunity right here to bring the whole ecosystem along, and if we can just make these next steps all together, but we can also empower each one, because it's not an easy either political, fundraising, purchasing environment. A lot of things have gone away, so it's a critical time for this kind of conversation to keep the companies moving that need it. And so we're looking forward to that. Thank you for listening and joining in. We're hopeful this was a helpful conversation to your process.
And I'll
Brilliant.
email in the chat if anyone wants to chat further.
Mine too.
Brilliant. Hari and Joe, any parting words, or should we begin to close out?
Just a quick thought. Thank you to everyone who came to participate and listen and contribute. Thanks, Jeff, Pierre, and all the contributors. Learning about your solutions is fantastic, and how it fits within the systems lens. To everyone, this is part 3 in a 4-part series. Welcome you to come back for the 4th part. And it's been a fascinating conversation throughout. Encourage you, if you didn't attend the previous ones, to go on the website and take a look. And also encourage you, these aren't one-off events and breakfasts. They're part of building a community that's really, to Jeff's point, trying to move this ecosystem forward to make change. So encourage you to engage, reach out to any of the people that you've heard from, or anybody on the call. I'll put my email. I think it's on the website as well. But I think this is the beginning of a conversation, so we can actually drive impact and change at scale via economic and investable pathways. Keivan?
Brilliant, Hari. Thank you. You took many of my words. Thank you. So I would love to direct you guys to our YouTube channel, where you will see the prior 2 sessions. Within the week, we will have this session on the channel also. And we'll also share a thank you note that, of course, thanks our panelists also for their adaptation skills today, because it was a unique situation. Thank you all for that, and all the participants. Most importantly, if there are additional questions and conversations that need to be had, please reach out to me. I can put you in touch with any one of our panelists. My email address will be in the thank you note and is at the top of the chat, along with, again, the YouTube channel. Beyond that, I just want to thank you all for your attention. We all have different resources at our disposal. Some is monetary, other material, networks, spheres of influence, any number of things. But the one thing that we all share is our attention. And we're placing our attention on something so very important to all of us. And we're increasingly learning why now is the time. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for joining us in the upcoming session. I fully anticipate there'll be future sessions. I hope that we can keep Joe and Hari connected and facilitating them. But if there are no other comments, Joe, it seems like maybe you want to say thank you.
Just saying thank you so much, and look forward to bringing it all together into the 4th session. Thanks so much.
Brilliant. Pierre, thank you. Jeff, thank you. Hari, Joe, thank you. Talk to you all soon. Take care.